So we wear a lot of caps at Dalberg. One of them is I am one of our two heads of our agriculture and food security practice. I'm a regional director for our energy practice with a focus on Africa, Middle East, Europe. And I also founded our London consulting office.
So the panel today, the topic was innovative ways to invent agriculture for African youth, right?
Well, it's actually a really interesting question, right? Because for a number of different reasons. I think people look at it from different perspectives and they're all right and they're all different opportunities. First of all, when people think about youth unemployment as a challenge, there's a big question around to what extent can agriculture be a way in which we can create really interesting livelihoods at scale for a lot of unemployed and underemployed youth. The second way of looking at it, or another way of looking at it, is where is there an urgent need for new human resource into agriculture? And a third way of looking at it is what even are we talking about when we say agriculture and agribusiness, and what are the kinds of jobs that exist there, and where's the new frontier? So we're doing a lot of work on all of these different areas. We've worked with the likes of the African Development Bank on looking at jobs for youth in Africa, and one of the key areas there was agriculture and agribusiness. And President Adesina talks a lot about agriculture and the agro-allied businesses, right? So it's not just people with their hands in the soil in the field, it's also people transporting produce, it's processing, it's retail, it's marketing, all of that. But at the same time, we just came back from another piece of work that we're doing here at Dalberg, which has a big Latin American focus, looking at the coffee industry. And a big challenge there is, how are we going to replant at scale? Because that's going to be key to ensure that we have enough coffee in the future. And the problem is that a lot of the farmers are old. And so it doesn't make sense to replant a tree because it's going to take years before it produces again. So you need young farmers. So how do we get young farmers into the coffee industry? And there it's an existential problem for the likes of the Starbucks and the Green Cafe Keurigs and the Newman Cafes of the world. So we look at it from a number of different angles. So that was one example. So some work that we've been doing in the coffee industry, right? Other examples that I can talk about, because often a lot of these things are live, include looking at that challenge which I just described, called renovation of farms. Often we're talking about trees, sometimes bushes. That's a big problem across a number of crops. So we've looked at this in coffee as well. We've worked with the likes of IDH and other actors on tea and palm oil. Then we've also looked at the challenges around youth employment in Cote d'Ivoire as part of the work that we've been doing around developing the National Agriculture Strategy. So a big lens there is youth employment, creating sustainable livelihoods, and engaging women and youth effectively.
What policies and programs can be done to promote investment in the sector through carbon law?
Right. Overall?
Yes, overall, Nigeria and Africa.
I think that there's parts of agriculture which are getting a lot of investment already, and there's parts which aren't. And you've got to understand why the same investor will be wary of the areas where they're not investing versus are. Okay? So there are well-established, replicable, well-understood, scale commercial agriculture opportunities and projects all around the world. You know, you've got effective plantation management for large-scale palm oil production. Cargill runs an excellent series of these plantations, and then it also works with a whole series of outgrowers around their nucleus farms as well. So they manage to engage in those smallholders, and they produce the same productivity as their core farms. But you take palm oil in Ghana, and that's a really challenging area. And Unilever and others have been trying to get investment into that area to try and make that commercially viable and effective as part of their value chain. Right? So why do actors not invest in some areas versus others? Often it's because of the risk. At least this is my personal perspective, that the returns look like they could be medium to low versus other industries, and the risk is high. There's a lot of risk in agriculture. There's weather, there is the agronomic risk itself, there's disease. Then if you're exporting or importing, you've got foreign exchange risk, all manner of things, right? And it's very hard to manage all of those. At the same time, it may be very hard to engage with a lot of small-scale farmers and small-scale operations. So you've got to really think about how do you manage that risk and how do you manage the cost to serve this or invest into this sector. And those that are thinking deeply around how you move risk around are the ones that are starting to have some really interesting discussions, because people want to invest in this space, and development actors, as an example, are interested in seeing more investment happen, and they may be willing to absorb some of that risk and leave the commercial investors to make those decisions around where they want to direct their capital. So this is talking about something called blended finance. Blended finance for agriculture is becoming a big topic.
What can we do to make it more productive for investors? So more like infrastructure, what kind of policies, like what can the government do so it's open, more productive, more profitable?
Right. There's a lot of things that government can do. And it does depend on the value chain or what they're looking at. But I think that any policy framework needs to be thinking about effective legislation on a number of different levels. So there's a lot of thinking that could and needs to be done around what kind of plant material is allowed into the country, and regulation, and allowing different seed technologies, etc. in. Not necessarily talking about GMO at all, but talking about new, better varieties that have been developed over time that are better suited for individual or particular agroecological zones or particular countries. There's other things related to a stable policy environment around taxes, around other aspects of legislation and regulation. But I think just as important, going outside of the traditional kind of policy area, some of the things that you just touched upon in your question, I think the investment in supporting infrastructure is really, really key. A huge amount of value gets lost through the post-harvest wastage, occurring through transportation and the lack of storage. So investing in those kinds of public goods also becomes really important.
I know we talked about youth and unemployment, so there are a lot of people trying to invest while in Nigeria, invest into agriculture, and a lot of youths are trying the sector exchange. So what advice do you have for youths or just people trying to invest in the sector?
Don't just think of getting some land and then figuring it out. Start with the market and figure out the opportunity. There's a lot of money to be made. And it doesn't take a genius to see that there's some big trends. People want to eat more meat. People want more convenient foods. Ingredients that go into those kinds of things. Being able to produce poultry, beef, being able to produce the feed that goes to those industries. Those are very fast-growing industries, and if you can start to think about those intelligently, you might have some interesting opportunities there. Other industries that are growing fast or that look interesting are ones that you see a very, very big opportunity to substitute for imports. Think about those as well. What are we importing lots of? And is there a way in which you can have an advantage position if you produce locally? Things that need to be fresh, that's often a great example. So that's why people are making a lot of money in horticulture, for example, tomatoes, things like that. So work back from the market and then start to think about your business plan. The other thing is, there's a lot of romanticism about the entrepreneur. And if there's one thing that Nigeria doesn't have a shortage of, is people who want to be entrepreneurs. But there's also a lot of value in trying to find out where is the most professional talent in farming. Can you get access to understanding how farming is done excellently? And there are some great commercial farmers that are looking for growing their management teams and getting into professional farm management and professional agriculture and agribusiness. Is there a way in through there that you can start to also learn how to do this excellently? Understand the market, get the skills. I'm sure actually once you get to do that, the money won't be that much harder to actually find if you can get those two things right. We're working with the UK's Department for International Development, which has been running a program for a number of years. It's called GEMS 4, and at the heart of it, they are linking farmers to markets and improving farmers' livelihoods by giving them better and more stable access to better opportunities to price their goods. There's a number of different value chains they're working on, and one of them is rice. And what David is really interested in doing is seeing these projects be sustainable. So part of that is finding investment into these value chains. We are presenting a perspective on rice in Nigeria that tries to understand where is the value to be made for prospective investors into rice today. And the answer everyone immediately thinks is milling. And we say, don't go into milling. There's enough capacity coming into milling that you are going to be challenged to make lots of money if you add more capacity into an industry which has lots. No. If we have sufficient supply of milling capacity, it's the supply of good quality paddy rice that is of sufficient grade to go into those mills to then go downstream, right? So those who are working on these kinds of factors, thinking how do we get farmers to increase their productivity and quality, there's a huge amount of money to be made from that spread between the low quality and the high quality rice that you can supply to the mill. That's the example of the kind of things that we're trying to do to really drive investment into this and really start to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. So Dalberg is an advisory firm that was formed about 17 years ago and was developed to work on the world's most pressing challenges, especially those affecting people in emerging markets. And so there's a number of different things that we do. One of them is consulting, but we also have human-centered designers. We have people who are investing. We have researchers and people working with big data analytics and beyond. There's about 400 of us around the world. A good amount of us are in Africa in a number of locations there as well. And we work on a number of different challenges. One of them being, which is close to my heart, and area I work on, agriculture, but many more besides.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.